So Ian is, oh, sorry, I must got the right person spotted. So Ian, you are with the Self-Managed Learning College. Is that right? Is that the name of it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll let you do your introductions. How's that? So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thanks. So thanks everybody. I'm just taking a sip of water, and this glass is a kind of a metaphor for what I'll be talking about, and it'll be apparent later on why. I've got a PowerPoint presentation. I've put my contact information in the chat box if people want to be in touch afterwards, because we've only got 45 minutes. I will go for about half an hour from now and then allow for a question and answer session. If you put stuff in the chat, then Lydia will pick it up and read out questions. Obviously, maybe comments as well, and I'd be happy to respond to those. And if we don't get time to deal with everything, then just get in touch with me.
Okay, I just want to say I'm not seeing anything in the chat, so I don't know if it predates me coming into the session.
Okay, I put something in the chat, but I'll put it in again. No, it's in there.
So why can't I see it?
Yeah, it is in there.
Okay.
I can copy it.
It might be
and
because
paste it in again.
Yes, it might be that those who've joined since then can't see it. So I think just put it in again. Thanks, Dore.
Okay. Right, okay, we'll plow on then. I'll go straight into share screen. Hopefully it will work. Now then, this is it. And to there. I'm hoping that people can see that screen okay.
Yes, fine.
Right, so I'm here actually on behalf of the Learning Communities Alliance. This is a new grouping of learning communities that has been formed this year to have a kind of collective voice for the way in which we're working. And so Self-Managed Learning College is our learning community, and it's part of the charity, the Centre for Self-Managed Learning. So I'm not speaking on behalf of the Learning Communities Alliance because we're not quite that formal, but I am speaking about learning communities in general and trying actually to say something about where they fit in the landscape of educational approaches. So quick definition that the Alliance has been working on is a group including young people who meet regularly as a community for the purpose of facilitating learning. So our college meets every morning during the week, and therefore it is a community in the sense that people join it, belong to it, and it's not a drop-in group. Young people are considered equal to adults, and they're involved in decisions about how the community functions. So, for instance, we have a community meeting every morning. It's chaired in rotation. It could be a 9-year-old or a 16-year-old chairing the meeting. Collective decisions are made. There's 40 of us within the community at the moment. Decisions about learning are made by the learner, and there's no compulsory instruction. So each individual has their own learning program that they've created. There are no classrooms, there's no timetable, there's no lessons, there's no formal teaching whatsoever. In our college, the students have a choice of how they want to learn, and nobody has asked us to recreate a classroom in the last 20 years of our existence. Each individual human learning is valued, and that's really quite important, that schools clearly don't value quite a lot of people there, which is why they want to offer all people. We do genuinely say everybody's equal value. There is no differentiation. There is no graded assessment put upon people or any way in which people are judged as better or worse than anybody else. Each person is different. They bring different things, and that's valued. And of course, we do have to comply with safeguarding requirements, which we do to make certain that we are seen as okay. And of course, we are a charity and a company limited by guarantee. So sometimes people say, you're not accountable like state schools, and we're going, yes, we are. We're accountable to both Companies House and to the Charity Commission. And both of those have quite strict regulations about how any organisation should be conducted. So I'm really starting off with this notion that there are some choices about where education should be. there's a writer called Rajan who his book is called Three Pillars, and what he's basically saying is that most of the decision making that is argued in politics and literature is between the state and markets. So crudely, more left-wing politics is said more state and less markets, and more right-wing is more markets, less state. But the assumption is that those are the two choices, that either education is driven by the state or driven by the marketplace. And of course, there's a strong market for education, lots of programs that are sold to parents from a marketplace, from profit-making organizations. And there's the state operation running schools, whether they're academies or within a local authority. And what Rajan argues is that what gets missed is community. So for instance, locally during this lockdown, we've had a food bank locally and work on it. It's nothing to do with the state or the market. People don't pay any money. There is no market arrangement. There's no state arrangement. We as families meet together locally. That's a community. It's nothing to do with either state or markets. And yet the dominant discourse in our society is the choice between the state and the market. And I've put in the family because that is actually missed in Rajan's book. And what I would argue is that those two kind of merge. That is that for 99% of human history, we've existed in hunter-gatherer bands, which in a sense merge the community and the family. So the extended family, the notion that a child growing up within such a community, that there was parenting was shared. The notion of allo-parenting is in the literature, the idea that other people play a role. Like I'm a grandparent, so I have two grandchildren and two step grandchildren, and therefore I play a role alongside the nuclear families of those offspring of ours. So in a way, I'm putting those two together a bit and separating them from state and markets, but we have to recognize that all of those exist. The downside of the current model, of course, and what is happening with home education is the assumption that state should play a greater role, and the notion that education is a public good, meaning that everybody should pay for it and therefore everybody should be compelled to use it, which of course works quite well with things like, I don't know, water. We all need water and therefore we need institutions that provide it. But food is also important, but we don't have the state involved in provision of food. So there are arguments that would, I think, quite neatly knock that one on the head, but it's beyond the scope of today to go into that. So what I want to do is to say something about then the options or choices that I see are around in education. That full-time schooling is seen as the norm. Of course, we know that the law says child should be in school or otherwise. It doesn't say school is preferable. It doesn't say school is better than otherwise. It just says there are two choices. But the otherwise choice isn't fully spelled out. So I was just trying to look at some of that. So this is just my mapping, and I'm using terminology in a particular kind of way. Partly I'm deliberately not using the word elective home education because I'd like to see that term disappear, frankly, and I can explain more about that. So if a parent is not choosing full-time schooling, what happens? Well, during the lockdown, of course, there's been a lot of homeschooling. That is, that parents tell me that the schools have sent stuff to their children and that they as parents have been expected to homeschool. That is, replicate the school within the home environment. One parent was telling me that they had to send in photographs of their child reading or writing or doing something each day in order to justify and prove that they as parents were doing what the school was dictating to them. Clearly, I don't have a lot of time for that. Home learning would be, of course, learning within the home that is chosen by the home, by the family. It's quite different. Now, what I'm interested in this concept of a parent-supported mode, because then parents, if you like, start with the parent, and you could put the parent at the middle of this, or have another map with the parent in the middle, because parents can choose full-time schooling. Parents can choose flexi schooling if the school allows, that is, to send a child in part-time. And I've put learning communities in that as saying there is a choice, therefore. So of the 40 students that we have in the learning community, 3 are actually on the school roll, and they kind of go into school a bit. Usually it's an afternoon. So there's a kind of flexi schooling model, and that's allowed parents to access school resources, but not be trapped in the curriculum and formal teaching, because they come every morning to our learning community. But obviously, people come every morning. It means that our students are learning elsewhere during the day, and that then fits in the home learning model. So what I'm trying to suggest is the kind of mapping here. And clearly, parents are making the choice, since parents are legally obliged to make certain that there has a suitable education in terms of their age, aptitude, ability, and any special needs, quoting the law. And of course, my argument is that if school is not providing something suitable, like when we've had parents where their kids are being beaten up every day in school or sexually abused, then it seems to me legally obliged of the parents to take the child out of school and find a more suitable environment, like a learning community or home learning or whatever. And therefore, the options are real options, I think. And so I wanted to explore a little bit about that option and how learning communities work. So this is a temporary learning community. We're working in Portsmouth over about a 5-year period. The We is our charity, the Centre for So-Much Learning, and the University of Sussex. And the idea was bringing schools together to work together. And I said, well, we've got to bring the young people together to work on what they wanted, how they would like to see schools to be different. So, and of course, trying to be inclusive. You'll note on the left, there's someone in a wheelchair, but other young people came who were not able to verbalize their thoughts. So we created a wall in this room with a giant, made a giant collage of how school is and how you'd like it to be. And then this is the next stage where young people were then working on issues that had come from the collage. And you will see adults, of course, sitting with young people and young people at the board and sitting in circles and all the things you might expect. So that was a temporary learning community. But then actually has continued to this day in terms of a student council in Portsmouth that came out of that day. So I've got a picture of a murmuration of starlings. I live Brighton way, and you get these starlings over the pier, and people imagine that there's someone in charge, you know, that there's a lead bird there, which is just not true. What the kind of chaos theory people would point out is that there's 2 rules for the starling. You have to fly at a certain distance from the next starling, and you have to fly at a certain speed that's consonant with being in that murmuration. But there's no one in charge. There are just 2 simple rules. It's a self-organizing system, and communities are like that, self-organizing. You know, when it was VE Day, we decided to have a party, even though there was lockdown, and so we had food and drinks in our front gardens and a cricket game played down the road. And all of this was ourselves organizing as a community and making our own decisions. You can self-organize. I mean, I've gone into schools and run groups, programs with young people, and it's quite fascinating. I usually get, well, we get either people one end of the spectrum, either they're the gifted and talented, as they call them, or the ones who are in and out of exclusion or, you know, seen as problem. And, you know, working with young people who seen as a problem in the classroom, you know, I'd go out with them and they organize themselves. So we'd go in the gym because they decide they want to play football. I just had to stand there. They could organize themselves into teams. They could organize what they were doing. They could agree on rules. They could, you know, otherwise people can self-organize. And most of our activity is actually self-organized. If we go walking down the street, there's nobody, hopefully, from the state telling us where to go or some market forces that are relevant. We know how to move around within our own communities. So that's all we're doing with kind of learning communities, saying, let's get people together. We're not going to have a curriculum and all the usual arrangements. We're going to have a way in which we can help people to be together, to learn with and from each other. So here's some of the things that I think are relevant to a learning community. First of all, normally we're face-to-face, but during the lockdown, we worked online, and that was no problem. We had 4 Zoom channels and about 35 of the students were on. Some of them were not, but they use Discord, which allows for asynchronous, because obviously some students find the whole Zoom thing. You have to remember that most of us, well, pretty well all our students have some issues. Pretty well all of them have anxiety issues and a whole range of other issues. So, boy, who I've just done his disability living allowance, his ASC, Tourette's, and sensory processing difficulties. He didn't find Zoom terribly congenial, but he's someone who was active in the normal communities and when we're face to face. But he was happy to be doing asynchronous communication through Discord. And what we're interested in is how a community where people feel together and think separately. Each person can think in the way they want to learn whatever they like, and there genuinely is no boundaries. It's quite a problem for when we have students joining us from school, less so if they've been home educated 100%, that they don't believe us. And we have to encourage them to ask for things, because in school they've been taught not to ask. And school, of course, requires young people to think together and feel separately. That is, that you've got to think the same way in order to pass the exams. Basically, your job in taking an exam is to suss out what the examiner wants you to think, and therefore you've got to put it down on paper in that way that you're thinking the way that the examiner wants you to think. And feelings, of course, should come where separate they belong. In the pastoral system, they belong to counsellors and psychotherapists and all the rest of it. We had an independent evaluation done of our college, as we call it, and the person who did the independent evaluation of ex-students said that the college is therapeutic without wanting to be therapeutic. I thought that was quite nice, because we always say that we're not a therapy operation, because schools tend to want to say, can you take these problem kids? And we mostly pretty well say, yeah, of course. But we try to explain that if somebody really needs in-depth therapy, that's not really our place. You know, we don't have the resources to do that. So I just think that notion of thinking and feeling being separated is the wrong way around, and it's just plain daft. Size is really important for a community, and a lot of the research done in America has shown that every young person needs to know every adult needs to know every young person. And the most important thing is every young person needs to know every other young person. Because if people really know each other, then you don't get bullying, you don't get a kind of abuse of each, because if people know other people closely and they're engaged with them, they have a different view about people. And all the research says that smaller settings are less likely to have bullying. The relationships between adults and young people are better, whereas we know that every secondary school in the country is an endemic problem of bullying and sexual harassment and all sorts of other things. And obviously the sexual harassment has just come out, but we've known for a long time all of these kind of things go on in large institutions that are getting larger every year. So what we're trying to do is to be different in the sense of small size, but providing a place where people can come together to engage with each other in a particular kind of way where they know each other well. And I've got a simple model of how people might interact. And of course, the school model is a directive one, directing people. And direction has its role. If we go out on a trip and someone's about to walk in front of a bus, we actually say, don't do it. In other words, we have to be directive at times, but only in terms of safety by and large. I can't think of any other reasons we would be directive about anything. People tend to think, well, you know, there's debate which is not as directive, you know, like school it's a one-way teacher to student. What about if people debate? That is a to and fro. But there's a very good article I just read the other week, you know, debunking that. The debate actually creates people taking sides. So you're on one side, you're on the other. This is how politics work. This is how the House of Commons is arranged, you know, on a one side against the other. And people take entrenched positions and they argue from that entrenched position, and it's not a learning-based model. I mean, by and large, certainly you don't usually see in House of Parliament people change their minds during a debate and vote differently. It may happen, but it's obviously pretty rare and not generally part of a debating model. So discussion obviously takes you to another level where, again, you hope that people are engaged with each other, and our students do a lot of discussing. The thing about discussion is it's something that is an they them world. It's the world of, you know, like we can have a discussion about vaccines, say, as an example of discussion that our students had, but it soon moved from a discussion about something, a thing outside of the individual student, into more of a dialogue where people were going, well, I would have a vaccine, and somebody else says, well, no, I don't think I would want to have a vaccine. And then it becomes more of a dialogue because it's an I you, or the Buber's I thou. It's the first and second person, not third person. And a lot of what goes on within a learning community is dialogic. It's people are engaged with each other, and they're understanding each other and learning about each other. And it's something that we lose sight of generally in society. I mean, you know, even if I'm going with adults, we run programs with companies on leadership development, but we don't have a curriculum or anything. And a first meeting of a group of 6, because we have these learning groups of 6 about leadership. Somebody will say, let's discuss leadership. But I'm going, what is your issue about leadership? You are labeled a leader. What does that mean for you? And what is happening for you, and how does that feel for you, and etc. And then other people. So it's encouraging a dialogue where there's real learning, whereas discussion has learning, but it's a disconnected, it's a learning out there. And so a lot of what we're trying to do in the community is to encourage that kind of dialogue. And one of the reasons is that if you're just learning independently, and all the encouragement, and of course what's terribly happening in universities now, where people aren't able to come together and learn with and from each other because they're all been learning online. And I think students are quite rightly critical of that. And this is just one piece of research. Every piece of research that's been done on hospitals shows that the more people are able to work together, the less patients die. In other words, it is a matter of life and death. If you don't have teams working together collectively, more people die. It's as serious as that. And unless we have developed that notion of an interdependence, a connection to others in young people, then we're just doomed as a society if everybody's out for themselves. And that whole unfortunate Thatcherite notion of no such thing as society is a terrible indictment on that political era, I'm afraid. So I'm back to my glass. What we are interested in, college, and the level of structuring varies across different learning communities, partly dependent on age. We go from 9 to 16, and most of the learning communities around the UK are a younger age range, and of course many of them are only like 2 or 3 days a week, so they not with all of us having to cope to government guidelines of less than 18 hours a week. But what was the value of that glass that I drank some water from? Well, first of all, it's actually quite rigid. I mean, in other words, there is a value in a structure and it's rigid, but the value of it is it's empty. So what we have are some rigid structures, like we have a community meeting, but it's empty. I mean, students can talk about anything they want, literally anything they want, so long as they stick by the rules that have been created by the community. Like you don't put people down, you wait your turn, all those kind of things. It's transparent. I mean, that we're very transparent about the way we work. Our students will write their own curriculum, if you like, but it's transparent. So everybody can see and everybody can. And resilient. The thing about a glass is that it's can cope with temperature change. Good old, I mean, the old-fashioned beer glasses, you put them in a dishwasher, they would crack because they're not so resilient. I used to be a chemist, so I can tell you the scientific reason for that. So if the glass was made of paper, it wouldn't work. You'd put the water in it, it'd go everywhere. In other words, there is a role for a structure. I mean, like that we have start and finish times, because within the community, it's very important to have a meeting in the first thing and a last thing. Partly it's a ritual that's important, but good rituals bind people and are liberating and helpful to people. Obviously, we don't want empty ritual, but having the structure of a community meeting is that it allows people to put things into it. If people were sort of wandering in and out, it wouldn't kind of work. And it's resilient in the sense that we can cope with the fact that people will raise different things. And people confuse structure and control. So I have written a paper way back on structures for freedom, saying that if you don't have structures, then there isn't actually freedom. There's a very good feminist critique from the 1960s, you know, of the tyranny of structurelessness, that women's groups figured, well, we'll get rid of patriarchy, so therefore we won't have any structure because that's patriarchal. And then, of course, what happens is the ones who shout loudest dominate, or cliques form and all sorts of things. And it was a very, very useful kind of critique of, if you just don't have any structure, then actually things fall apart. You know, even within our local community here, we have a kind of structures of things, you know, like we agreed when we were going out on the VE day that we'd all be in our front gardens eating and drinking, but then we kind of mingled later on. So structure is important, and it's a kind of a Taoist notion that usefulness comes from nothingness. It's not the person who invented the wheel that was important, it's the person who invented the hole. Once you put a hole in a wheel, you can form an axle, and then it's useful. The room I'm in at the moment is useful because it's got a roof and ceilings. In other words, there is a structure to this. It wouldn't be much use if it was out in the open on a day like today, which here is quite windy and not so warm. Structures are important, but they have to be liberatory structures. So what we're trying to do with the structure is have a harmonious place. That people, I sometimes talk about one in the team, you've got to sing from the same hymn sheet, but if it's a unison and it's same pitch, and it could get boring. The whole thing is that people are different, and harmony means the unifying of difference, bring difference together and recognize it, and each person making a contribution to the culture of the community through the difference. That, for instance, it's very important that we have students who are autistic. Autistic students will, you know, every now and then present to the community on what it is like to be autistic, and the issues, say, about noise, which one of our girls has a very strong issue about noise. And it's very important that the community is recognizing that and working with that issue for that person. And it works both ways. I mean, the person who's on the autistic spectrum with a noise issue hopefully gets support, but other people start to realize, wait a minute, someone's different, but they're a friend of ours, they're one of the community, they're someone we care about. And I think that's really quite important. So last slide I'll put up, I think, and then we'll open it for question and answer. I could say more about the way we operate. The school model is to start on the right-hand side. That schooling starts with, here's skills we're going to teach you, here's some solutions to problems you haven't thought about, here's some subjects you've got to learn, specialization systems. Now, because the world doesn't exist as subjects, it just exists as the world. There are no subjects, that's just a human invention. Any curriculum is a totally subjective invention. What we want to do is to start on the left-hand side. Who is this person? What kind of problems do they have? What are their processes of thinking? What patterns of behavior do they have? And then how do we then move from left to right? So the first week that anyone's with us, we find out about them, and we ask them a series of questions to help them to think through what they want to do in life, and issues that they might now face, and things that they want to deal with and not deal with, and etc. One simple distinction between the problem solution and why this is a problem in education, and then I shall stop, is that I did a chemistry degree, and when presented with the problem of mental health, I would have gone into a pharmaceutical company and created pills. Later, working in the world of psychotherapy, presented with someone with a mental health problem, I would sit down and talk to them. Psychotherapists and chemists never ever talk to each other. I don't think ever in human history, I can't remember. They might have been, but it would be a weird notion that a chemist and a psychotherapist would actually talk together. and yet we're dealing with the same problem, a huge social problem, which is growing. We know mental health problems are huge. Of course, pills and talking have a role. But how do you actually bring that together, and how do you have more sensible research, for instance? You know, the research is dominated by creating pills. So we distort the problem to fit the solution that we've been taught. That's what schooling does. That people leave school and leave college and university with a certain way of, I've learned these things, now how do I distort the world to fit my needs? I know it's a bit of a crude distinction, but what we're trying to do in a community is to say people are different. How do you understand the fact that people are different, that their processes are different? And of course, in the teen years, this is the time when people are establishing an identity. And so it's really important that they have an opportunity to explore, who am I? What is my identity? School values certain identities like the academic ability or sporting ability, and doesn't value other abilities that young people may have, especially practical abilities, for instance. Okay, so that's a quick overview of the idea of communities, why lots of parents who are otherwise and who are categorized as elective home education are sending their children to communities like ours and like exist around the country. So it's what I want to do is to just explore, here's an option, and it's just one of the options that are facing any parent. So Lydia, what's in the chats? Have we got anything in the chat?
Hi, Ian. First of all, thank you very much for your presentation. I haven't got any question yet.
Okay.
So I'm just making aware, I suppose, all the guests, if they want to type any question into the chat, please, for Ian.
While you're doing that, I'll just do one other slide and then see if anybody else has got any questions or comments. But part of what we're trying to do is to challenge a different way of thinking about learning. So the school model is an additive one. The student is an empty bucket and we're pouring knowledge into them. Actually, one of the major changes that people need to make often is changing habits, changing the way that they do things. And a lot of the time our students do that, and then when they're asked when they've left, you know, what have they gained? Of course, a lot of them say, and we've had this independent research with students who've left 10 years ago, that they think differently to other people, that they're more self-managing, they have social skills, they often would describe, and those have not come through being taught anything. We don't teach people how to chair a meeting, they just go do it. And 9-year-olds enjoy chairing meetings. So I think in a community, you have the opportunity to help people to look at their behavior and the ways in which they want to do things, and not an educational model. Right, let me stop again. Have we got any?
Yes, I do have a question for you from the Learning Circle. If a child wants to study a math and English GCSE with SMLC, how would they be supported?
It's not difficult. Should I get rid of this? Can I get rid of the?
Would you like me to stop sharing the screen?
I'll share the screen, yeah, and we can go back to. So it's not a problem. Our students do GCSEs, and one of the things we're doing is actually setting up an exam centre separate from the college, but under the charity, the Sussex Exam Centre, because we've had students going into schools and colleges to sit GCSEs. So it's no problem about supporting students. And this year, what we're doing is they're sitting mocks, and staff are writing reports so that they can get a GCSEs. Last year, we had 6 students in what would have been year 11 in school, but we don't work by years, of course. And all of them got their college places. In fact, it was quite interesting that one student went to a local organization to do something. It was on a computer gaming, I think, diploma. And after a few weeks, the college said, we'll put you into year 2 because you're actually well ahead of everybody. So they do GCSEs, and some of them will take 6 or 8, and some will take just say English and maths because that's all they need, and others don't take any at all. One boy was very autistic, not been to school for a year, really way behind in all his academic learnings. He did English GCSE, failed maths. 2 years for education college, he managed eventually to pass maths, then did an access course, then did a psychology degree, volunteered with us, and he's now back working part-time with us, doing psychology, sociology, etc. with students, and often, interestingly, being asked to help them with maths because he knows what it's like to struggle to pass maths. And so although we have a qualified maths teacher working in the team, some of the students go to Charlie because they think he's going to be actually much more interesting. Side by side gallery, that's better.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, have I got any more questions now? Let's check.
Well, people can just put their hand up or shout. There's
Yes.
not very many people in, so it's pretty easy if people wanted to just shout anything.
Shall I unmute the guest?
Yeah,
They can unmute themselves if they want
can
to ask a
unmute
question. Yes, so if anyone has a question, they can also raise their hand with reactions if they want to.
Yeah.
They
Otherwise,
want-
finish.
I've got another question to follow
Yeah.
up from what I asked before. So do you kind of support the students, if students have decided to take a qualification, GCSEs for example, do you support the students by helping them to plan their learning, prioritize, to pace their learning so that they're ready for the exam? To help them with things like past papers and stuff like that?
It absolutely depends on the student. We found from our research there's 57 different ways that young people can learn. So let me take an example. I can mention her name because she was in the local paper about something else. So Coco was taking law GCSE a year early because I think that exam board was stopping the law GCSE. Now she was learning it out of a book and she was quite happy to do that. When she came to us at 13, she was pretty much kicked out of school because ADHD and dyslexia. And they said, well, she's just doodling all the time in the classroom and not doing any work. So when she came to us, she drew cartoons and annoyed people for a year, sat on the sofa and basically chatted to people with ADHD. By the age of 15, she'd already published a graphic novel, adult standard. It was published by a major publishing company in the graphic novels field. And she also decided to do law, and she was doing masses of other things. She became an expert on herpetology and all sorts of things. Anyway, so I said to her, well, would you like to meet a lawyer? And she said yes. So we got a lawyer on our governance. So someone came in and they had a nice chat. If she said no, it wouldn't have happened. It's totally her choice. I could offer it and she has the right to say no. Would you like to see the law in action? She said, yeah. So we took a group down to the Magistrates Court, which is the best free show in town. And we go to Court 1 down in the Brighton Magistrates Court, and you get all the people coming up from the cells. So you get all the juicy cases. Domestic violence was a big one the day we were in. And so they can see the law in action. There's solicitors for real, you're up in the gallery. She could choose any way she wanted. On one of the films about us, there's a boy called Sam there, and so I can mention his name because he's on the film, and he was doing science and I was helping him with it. So he was very autistic, but he actually was a tremendous person within the community. And there's an amazing TEDx talk that he did at age 16 in the local TEDx, even though he's very autistic. But he has that confidence. But he, when he was learning physics, chemistry, he would just come up to me and say, I'm having a bit of trouble with this bit of electromagnetism. So I'd go and help him. So our role is very reactive one, unlike teaching, which is very proactive. So teachers come along with, this is what I'm going to teach, and plan a lesson. We don't know what the student's going to ask. It's part of the fun of working in the community, because I wouldn't know what one day to the next what Sam would raise. The next day it might be something else around the periodic table, or and so a lot of our work is quite reactive, because students are asked for things. Sometimes as a group of students want to do something, so we have a workshop. Sometimes students will run workshops. They did one on the, so we got, I mean, good example, we got a student who decides she wants to go interior design. So they've redesigned the art room, and she's got a team of other people helping her. They've repainted the walls, they've created some new storage facilities and new arrangements in the art room. And she's learning interior design by doing it. No big deal. We do the Arts Award, by the way, which is wonderful for our students because we can assess it, unlike GCSEs. We also do Crest Awards in science because they're again great around project learning. So we like to do, I mean, we're not fans of GCSEs, it's just that we know that students feel they have to do it. But then Monty, who was I think he got about 8 A's and A stars. And he went to Sixth Form College, one of the prestigious local Sixth Form colleges. He lasted 4 days and said, this is pointless, and walked out. And when I spoke to him a week or 2 later, he'd been hired by a company in Atlanta, Georgia, to do blockchain development, really leading edge stuff, because he'd been putting out stuff on the internet while he was with us, having worked with our IT guy, and he'd been creating all sorts of amazing stuff that I couldn't possibly understand. And so he's, his next stage, because he's doing it from Brighton, and the company he works with is in Atlanta, so he tends to work in the morning and then might be on the phone or chat with the company in an afternoon, given time differences. So his plan is to travel the world and just go and live here. I might go to Bali and spend a year there, and just find a place with good Wi-Fi. Just, what's the problem? I can work anywhere. And schools, of course, are preparing people for jobs that are won't exist. STEM subjects, forget it. Most of those jobs will be robotized out of existence. We know that where robots and AI will replace humans is, of course, in the creativity and social intelligence, the ability to work with other people. Those won't be replaced. Our president is an expert on AI. She's on the top 20 list of most important people in education in the country. She has the chair of learner-centered design at the Institute of Education in UCL, and her book is very good on all that kind of stuff. So yeah, they can learn anything they want in any way they want, and that's we often have to present ideas to them, but they can reject them. They have total freedom, and there's no punishment for anything. I mean, there's no punishments within the college, so they know that they can do what they like.
So Ian, I haven't been in for the whole session, obviously, but so the children, most of the young people that come to you are registered sort of home education, basically known as home educators, but they are then using the school, which actually supports the families, supports the parents to help their children really in a way that's maybe a bit more, because not all parents, have maybe got the time or, or don't have the knowledge. So you're filling a very important gap there for some families, right? Yeah, and some families, obviously, a lot of families don't want us. I mean, we know locally that they're interested in, for instance, drop-in groups and things like that, and if they don't want a community operation, they see us as too institutionalized, because it is a building, and people come in every day. I mean, if they don't come in, there's no punishment, but they get used to the idea that they want to be with other people. So obviously we don't, there's quite a few people in home education who wouldn't want to come near us, and that's fine. I believe in the right of parents to make whatever choices they want, and the children. But others feel that it is better to have this mode of working. I mean, Naomi Fisher, who's one of our parents, I mean, she's written a very good piece around why you would choose a community rather than home ed. But it's an option. It's an option. It's one version that fills a gap and a need for some people. Yeah. And that's the whole having the freedom to choose. That's what we're all about, really. A lot of people haven't known that these exist around the country. There's lots of learning communities around the UK, and I think a lot of people in home education don't know, and in some cases might feel it would be a good idea, in which case part of the role of the Alliance is to help people to set up a learning community and to help them through the legal minefields and
the bureaucratic mess that sometimes can be created around this. Like we've had 2 Ofsted inspections in 5 years. But I think we all feel in the existing communities that we want to help other people who might want to create something in their own locality. And we're looking to create a new version of what we do in Bristol next year.
Okay.
Okay, is that enough for today? I think it's gone.
Oh,
And Neil had his hand up.
I've got another question for you, Ian.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, you know, most people are conditioned to think, you know, that you do your GCSEs, you do your A levels or whatever, or maybe some vocational qualification. But most of us are most people are not that aware of all these other qualifications and routes that there are to jobs or further study in your life. So but when people become aware of that, of course, they start to see, oh, well, actually, I can do what I really want to do because there is a route, right? And do you do kind of workshops on this, you know, like or learning around alternative routes to get where I want to go in my life?
Not specifically on that, but we've done programs for home educating parents around how they could play more of a role, perhaps, you know, the kind of structures that might help young people, because we know that some flounder and kind of just, I mean, you know, the danger when you say, well, all of these things around school are bad, so let's just not do any of them. And it's like there's a certain kind of glue that holds a school together, like people like their friends there and things like that. Yeah. So that piece I did about the glass, you know, I think that we can, I did a 2-day workshop with parents at Forest Row a few years ago. We've also run groups for those parents who just want to home educate, but would like a bit of a structure. So we do like a Friday afternoon group. And we are starting an afternoon program in addition to the morning program, by the way. From September, people will be able to come in the afternoons because we know a lot of young people don't get up in the morning, and therefore, you know, we'll be starting at 1:30 for those whose body clocks don't correlate with school timetables. We start 9:15, which is a bit late, but we still have some of the older students struggle with 9:15. So we're going to have a 1:30 to 4 o'clock program. But yeah, we you know, we do write stuff. I've written a book which talks about that, and I'm going to write another one which is more practical. So the book that I've just been published is more around the reasons for this and the background and the basics. And then next year, I hope to get something out on the practicalities, like the simple things like how do you ask questions of a young person, you know, which people don't always think about, but actually a lot of what we do is asking questions. And unlike schools ask questions of young people because they know the answer and they're testing the person. I ask a question of a young person because I don't know the answer. You know, it's like, who are you? What's important to you in life? You know, why are you here? You know, I mean, and I don't know the answer to that. And so all the questions I ask young people are because I don't know the answer. Schools ask questions because they do know the answer, and they're testing people and making kids look foolish because they don't get what the teacher thinks they get. So yes, we do try to do work practically with other people. We've been helping with a program in London that's setting up using the approach we've been working with. So we do try to be helpful, and we try to publish stuff, and there's stuff on our website which people can just download for free and use it for free, you know, so.
And can I, I'm sorry, I'm just, if anybody else wants to ask a question, please do. I've got loads of questions for you. Can I, or should I wait?
If you don't mind me chiming in here, Ian, it might be better actually, Ian, if you sort of set up something like a separate thing, or maybe you can on the app actually set up a virtual meetup where you can say, create your own Zoom sessions, maybe to discuss specific things. So there are various ways. So if it might be good if especially if Anil's got lots of questions, that might be good, and then you can see if anyone else is interested and have a whole different session just chatting about asking questions, because we will need to wrap up soon. Okay. So our volunteers can have a break and have their dinner and look after their families as well.
That's
Yeah,
fine.
let's
I can
stop,
always
and then
look
Anna
at it.
can be, I can talk with Anna. Absolutely. So anyway, thanks for the questions. And you know, if anybody is want to be in touch, the contact information is in the chat. Cheers, and thanks, Juliet, for organising this conference, which is great.